Okay, you're live.
Okay, thank you very much. And welcome everybody to the Committee of the Whole for June 21st, 2022, being held electronically on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. I'd like to start the meeting firstly by recognizing it is National Indigenous Peoples Day in Canada, and also that recognize both the Sechelt Nation and the Squamish Nation and the United Canadian Métis Nations here on the Sunshine Coast. It was very good yesterday to participate in the graduation ceremony for the alternate school and to see the numbers of feathers that were given out to Indigenous students, as well as the Métis sashes that were given out to Métis students. And we certainly have a much more significant, I must say, number of First Nations, Indigenous students attending our schools than we ever had when I was a student, because we know where they were in the 1960s. And it's great to see that that they are no longer there, and the residential school system is a thing of the past for us. So it's greatly appreciated. We have an agenda today, and I'm going to amend the agenda today by pulling item number 4.2, and this is the amendments to the tree bylaw. We've had some last minute additional amendments that I know council hasn't had a chance to thoroughly review yet. There's over 30 amendments suggested, and it's unfair to staff, unfair to council, unfair to the public to go through those individually in the context of this meeting. So that we will deal with those another time after staff has had a chance to review them, and they'll bring it back forward to us. Okay, so we'll do that. So with that change on the amendment on the agenda, I'd ask council to approve the agenda. Amended. Councilor Kroll, Councilor D'Andrade, thank you. All in favor? Thank you very much. We have a delegation, a little bit of an amendment to that. Daniel Haig from Stantec is sick. So Rafe Shea, the manager of sustainable development of the Sunshine Coast Regional District, will be handling that presentation, and which I'm sure he will be able to do as he has done in the past. So Rafe, I see you've joined us. We'll bring your picture up. There you go. Hey, welcome. And Rafe, we have the copy of the presentations, both from Stantec and yourself. So I will turn the meeting over to you. And thank you very much for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Are you getting feedback as well?
No, not. No.
Wonderful.
No.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight with you, or this afternoon with you. I'm calling from Montreal, visiting family, which is the meeting place of many First Nations, but most predominantly the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, the Abenaki, and the Anishinaabe.
Oh.
And it's my pleasure tonight to do a summary of Mr. Haig's presentation on our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And I'll have that in my slides here, and then we can dive into the other reports that I'll be sharing as well.
Thank you.
So with that, I will share my screen and have it in presenter mode. Are we good on? Good. Wonderful. So I'm here on behalf of the Sunshine Coast Regional District, and we are working on a community climate action plan. And then this afternoon, what we'll cover is a quick overview of the project, as well as 3 reports that we've recently completed: the climate science report, the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and the climate risk assessment. Now, there's a wealth of information in these, so I'll try to just hit a few of the highlights rather than speak too quickly, but happy to take any questions as well. So we're all familiar with the strategic plan for the SCRD, which calls for the creation of a community, or of a lot of different community climate action items, the climate change adaptation strategy, corporate emissions and energy emissions plan, and all of that is suggested to be done with the lens of social equity, which is really important as we consider that the most vulnerable are oftentimes the most affected by climate change. So briefly, we're going to be looking at, through this process, mitigation, which we're loosely following the Partners for Climate Protection framework, which is about reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, as well as adaptation, which is we're following the ICLEI Building Adaptive and Resilient Communities framework with our partners at ICLEI Canada. And our ultimate objective is to bring these two together to create a low carbon resilient community and really minimize the maladaptations that can come with one or the other on the different actions. So in 2021, we looked at the emissions inventory and initiated the research. In 2022, and so that's what we're wrapping up now. In 2022, we'll be moving into the targets and initial actions planning. And then we'll be looking at refining that action plan in 2023 and building some partnerships for implementation. Now, with that being said, I'll point out at the bottom of the screen here, it's really important that we seize tactical opportunities as they arise, because we are running out of time. We need progress, and we need it now. On the public engagement side of things, we'll loosely structure this over 3 phases. So right now we're in phase 1 around setting the context and sharing the results of the information, this foundational information that we generated for the Sunshine Coast. Following that, we'll be diving into the initial framing of the focus areas and that brainstorming of the initial list of actions and an emission reduction target for the community. And then finally, diving into 2023, we'll be going into the action planning. So the first report is the climate science report. Now, I don't think there's anything here that you haven't heard before, but I'll hit a few of the highlights. One of them is that obviously the science is evolving quickly. One of those elements is that the international or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued its 6th assessment report recently. And a lot of this was based on modeling that was heavily reliant on the 5th assessment report, which is a few years old now. So we'll have to revisit this as we get more downscaled data for our community in particular. Some of the things to note is we can probably expect a couple weeks of weather above 30 degrees as a normal in the next few decades. We'll have a radical decrease in freeze-thaw days, which is good for our road infrastructure. And we can see the annual average temperatures are going to be going up. That means a growing season will be expanding as well. We can generally expect an increase in precipitation. But with all of that said, what I want to point out here is that we're not only looking at the averages or the means going forward. What's really interesting here is we need to be ready for an increased frequency and an increase in the extremes that we're going to be seeing. So one of them that we're quite familiar with on the Sunshine Coast is droughts. And we've already seen multiple times in the last summers, we're already exceeding the summer precipitation projected for 2050 on average. So we're already well beyond the standard deviation on several occasions. And that's really what we need to be looking at as well, is those extremes. Another extreme is the precipitation. So here, as part of the project, we've updated the intensity, duration, frequency curve for the Sunshine Coast, which is how much rain are we going to get in a short period of time. And that has a variety of implications downstream. But in general, what we can expect is the 100-year event will become a 20-year event, and the 20-year event will become a every 10-year event probability. So that's a brief overview of the climate change projections. There's quite a bit more that we can dive into if you're curious. But if there's no questions, I'll be happy to dive into sorry, I don't have a full screen of everybody here.
Hey, Ray, thank you. I see that Councilor DeAndrade has a question, so I'll turn over to her.
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to thanks for the report. I just want to clarify, when you make the projections, is business as usual, or considering the approach, the best science, and consider that we will apply the best science and we will reduce emissions? So these scenarios right now, 30 days or 13 days of extreme heat. Is it even if we apply, or this is if business as usual?
Thank you for the question, and that's an interesting distinction to make. Is we've already locked into change for the next few decades, even if we eliminate all emissions today. So for the next few decades, this is a reasonable projection moving forward. What we're really talking about is in the next few decades beyond that. We're looking at, if we have a moderate decrease in emissions is the basis of a lot of these projections. So if business as usual continues to relatively stay flat or increase slightly on the global emissions front, but we all know that at 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius change, we end up with an unstoppable climate change where a lot of the feedback mechanisms would be self-perpetuating, and then our ability to mitigate those becomes extremely limited. So these projections are based on a plateau of emissions, more or less, assuming that we are able to not engage those positive feedback mechanisms. And like I mentioned, a lot of the science is evolving, so we'll get some greater understandings too as we get some greater granularity on the science, on the projections.
Mayor, can I have a second question?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think based on the past, even though we had good science 20 years ago, actually 50 years ago, people were already. Actually, I read an article that talks about the projection was quite accurate considering the ones made 50 years ago. So take into consideration that we don't follow what we say that we are going to do. Do you consider this in your projections as well? Because of this best scenario, right? We do everything we say. Other scenarios, we do maybe 10%, because I see a lot of reports that talk about even measurements that the federal government are taking right now. It's not going to address one part. So how, and I understand too that this doesn't, even though I think the Sunshine Coast would be responsible to a certain extent, but I don't think we have complete control. So I'm just curious if this is considered on these projections too, or these projections are very optimistic if we do consider everything we are saying we should do.
No, I'd say these projections are realistic no matter what for the next few decades. And then beyond that, things could be more severe or a lot less severe if depending on our current actions on a global scale on our emissions pathways.
Okay, so it's pretty much locked in the next 20 to 30 years?
Yeah, that's generally what I've been hearing.
Any other questions from council before we proceed with the next part? Okay, seeing none, Rafe, I'll go back to you.
Okay, so the next report that we've generated, and this is Mr. Hagg's report, was the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And what we did for this is follow the global protocol for community scale greenhouse gas emissions inventories. That's a mouthful, and we usually call it the GPC. One advantage of the GPC is that it's a standard that's followed around the world. So it enables us to compare our community to other communities around the world and have a certain consistency with the methodology. Essentially what it captures is a lot of the scope 1 emissions, which include the stationary fuel combustions around natural gas for home heating, our waste and our industry, as well as our transportation. Scope 2 emissions in the middle there would be emissions that don't necessarily happen in the community, but are the result of us using electricity in the community. So they're tied to the generation of electricity elsewhere. And then we start to look at scope 3 emissions as well, in terms of things like transmission and distribution losses on the power system, as well as transboundary transportation. Now, here's a more detailed view of the GPC protocol's subsectors. And you can see that there's a few that we've crossed out. Railways, for the obvious reason that we don't have any. But we've crossed out incineration and burning. We know there's a lot of wood heating on the coast, but we don't have any data to help quantify that. Again, other scope 3, so the embodied carbon with the manufacturing of our cell phones, for example, was not considered. And then land use as well. We didn't have enough data to understand, to really quantify with confidence the land use and associated emissions with land use changes. So we've calculated those, but we didn't include them in the actual numbers that we're sharing today here. So for the Sunshine Coast as a whole, you can see that this is similar to what was done in the past, is the majority of our emissions are road transportation. And on the Sunshine Coast as a whole, our emissions have increased slightly between 2007 and 2019. Off-road transportation, which a big chunk of that is associated with the ferries, is another transportation-related emission source. The industry and construction, a big chunk of that is tied to our larger industrial manufacturing sites on the Sunshine Coast. And then residential is another big part of the equation for our emissions sources. Another way of looking at this is what kind of fuel are contributing to our emissions. And you can see that diesel and gasoline for transportation are a big part of the equation, as well as natural gas for industry and home heating. But what we did here is also attempt to break down the emissions specifically for town of Gibsons. So here you have a little bit more detail, but the storyline is the same, that transportation emissions account for the majority of our emissions. And then residential home heating with natural gas is another significant piece of it. For town of Gibsons, there has been a more significant drop in per capita emissions over the last 12 years. So that's promising. But as a whole, we seem to be generally staying relatively steady in terms of where we're heading. As part of the exercises, we've created a forecasting tool that assumes a relatively small level of success with provincial and federal policies. And you can see that that really simply flatlines our emissions for the Sunshine Coast for the next decades. So that's not where we need to go. We need to be going down. So what I wanted to add here is, in order to align with federal and provincial targets, which are around 45% reduction by 2030, and that is really the minimum threshold of what we need to achieve to avoid unstoppable climate change. This is built on actual data for the Sunshine Coast by the Community Energy Association. And by modeling the big moves that we see in the table here, shifting beyond the car, electrifying passenger vehicles, better existing buildings and better new buildings, this doesn't include the industry, but we can see that it is possible to achieve that green line 45% reduction by 2030. Unfortunately, this model assumes extremely successful implementation in every area. So although it is possible, it will not be easy to get to where we need to go. And that will be the focus of our next phase of engagement. Okay, so now moving into the climate risk assessment that we've completed with our partners at ICLEI Canada. We worked with a community project team and started off with a long list of impact statements that was over 250 long. And through a variety of workshops and questionnaires and surveys, we've boiled that list down to 9 risks to focus on. And I'll highlight a few of these here. I'll highlight all 9 of them here. So the first one is drought. So it's a multi-pronged impact that's both increasing demand and decreasing supply, such as increasing temperatures, decreasing summer rain on the SCRD water system. I'm sure you're all familiar with our emergency siphons that are being used right now on temporary permits for providing some safety for water supply. And the water strategy under development by the SCRD has a link at the bottom of the page there for people who are interested in participating in that discussion. Another major risk of concern was the increased risk of wildfires. We've had some recent experience on the coast. Every year of my 4-year-old's life has had poor air quality in the summers where she wasn't able to leave our house. So that's part of her lived experience. As far as wildfire, the fire piece of it is concerned, the SCRD does have a community wildfire protection plan, and I'll just do a plug here for my colleagues in protective services that people can get a free Fire Smart assessment at this website, scrd.ca/firesmart. And that's free people coming to visit your property to give you some recommendations on what you can do there. But yeah, there's a lot more that we need to do as our coastal temperate forest continues to change. Another risk that was flagged through the process is sea level rise. Now, I didn't include this one in the science report because we're still all working with the recommendation of 1 meter sea level rise by 2100. But those recommendations, like I mentioned, are based on a few-year-old data. So this was one exercise on a global scale to model what the 2021 international consensus of the data of the science is telling us. And you can see that some areas in Gibsons are marked red, which would be at risk of an occasional flood during a king tide and big winds and sea level rise in the not too distant future. So this was obviously from a global model. It just flags areas that may be worth investigating further. And our partners at Seychelles Nation have done just that, and we will be releasing a sea level rise risk map for Seychelles Nation lands any week now. So we're looking forward to seeing what that looks like for our community more specifically, and then maybe we can expand from there. But we have a lot of critical infrastructure that's certainly vulnerable. Another risk that we identified was ocean acidification and warming. So we've got a change in ocean chemistry. And it's important to note that the pH scale of acid and base is logarithmic. So a 0.1 change in pH, which is what we've seen over the last 200 years, is quite dramatic. It's 30% more acidic. So a lot of the small organisms at the bottom of the food chain are no longer able to create their protective shells, and that has some impacts along the food chain. There's also a recent study by NOAA in the US that found that Dungeness crabs are having a harder time navigating in the waters and finding food with the increased acidity. So there's a variety of impacts there that are impacting the food chain and people dependent on the oceans. Climate risk 5 is extreme weather. We've all learned what an atmospheric river is, and we can expect to see those more frequently in the near future. On that, I would just like to flag that some analysis from Environment Canada found that the purple dots, which is where we saw a lot of the catastrophic highway failures along the Fraser Valley and into the hills there, was about a 1 in 100 year return period for those storms. If you look at the red dots, which cover the Sunshine Coast, they mean that we were actually a 1 in 25 year return period on those storms. So the Sunshine Coast got off easy on that November 2021 storm. And even then, we could see a lot of severe impacts. So a 1 in 25 year storm could become a 1 in 10 year, perhaps, return frequency in the near future. So we haven't seen really what a 1 in 100 year storm will look like on the Sunshine Coast yet. And then another climate risk that was flagged is the increased risk of vector-borne diseases and pests. The Sunshine Coast is now at risk of Lyme's disease. The map was just recently released by the BC CDC. And I just learned of another tick-borne disease called anaplasmos, I think, that's now also spreading on the other side of the Rockies. So just something to be cognizant about. We all know that, how mountain beetle impacted our communities and our forest ecosystems. So how can we prepare for what's next? Those are the questions that we're posing now. Another climate risk, I didn't number this one, but it's the increased temperatures and creek flows and biodiversity. Already, as we monitor the temperatures in Chapman Creek, we can see that it's often too warm for salmon to spawn. And we all know that salmon is a keystone species, which has cascading effects when they're impacted. Red cedars are stressed due to lack of moistures, and we can witness that in our parks and in our forests. Those are just some of the examples that we're witnessing already. Another climate risk is the increased exposure of marine life during low tides. This is something that I was not aware of before we went through this exercise and the heat dome last summer. But you can see some pictures from Vancouver there. The interesting part of this storyline is that the beach is closed due to E. coli, and I think that was the first time ever that happened on the Sunshine Coast because of all the filter feeders had died. That's something that we need to be aware of because the beaches are one of our main cooling spots to adapt to heat in the near future. So if we can't relieve our heat stress with our local beaches, then we'll have to start planning for alternative measures. And then speaking of heat domes, well, that's one example of what's going to happen with more frequent heat waves and back-to-back climate emergencies. So that will have a lot of health risks, especially amongst vulnerable populations and equity-deserving groups. I need to update this number. I think the official number from the heat dome now is 690 deaths, which makes it the deadliest climate event in Canadian history. And that's leading to climate grief, which is really prevalent with our younger demographics and something we need to be aware of as we speak about this and lay the path for the future. Another item that I just want to flag here because I think it's really important is this concept of climate violence. There's a lot of research now pointing to the increase in violence, including domestic violence, when we are repeatedly feeling different climate stresses. And that's a particular concern with the loss of social connectedness from the pandemic, and something that we can hopefully all be aware of. There's another section to the climate risk report that didn't make it to the top 9, but are things that are happening outside of our boundaries, or maybe not necessarily on the top 9 list right now. The one of them in particular that I want to flag is the possibility of climate refugees. The climate crisis is a human crisis in many ways. And already we're seeing about 20 million people a year relocating within their own countries every year due to climate extremes. The Pacific Climate Impact Consortium last year released a report that said about a third of humanity will be living in places that are going to be hard to be inhabitable by humans as early as 2050. So that's about 2.2 billion people. To put that number into context, the Syrian refugee crisis was about 6.8 million people, asylum seekers outside of Syria over a span of 10 years. There was another about 6 million refugees within Syria. But we all know from the news the strain that placed on the social cultural fabrics of different communities, especially the ones welcoming those refugees, or not so much. So something to be aware of is, what does that look like? What would be the Sunshine Coast role in the eventuality of a mass relocation of human beings? Well, those are the highlights. All of these reports are available for the public on letstalk.scrd.ca/climate. We've got a few engagement tools there already, including a quick survey on the climate risk that's most of concern to people. We got a map where people can start pinning inspirational stories they can see around the community. And we'll be releasing more, including a survey in July as we move to developing a climate action plan. Stop my sharing.
Ray, thank you very much. Yeah, it's almost depressing. I think it would be good if next time you do this presentation, if you're wearing a black hooded cape and carrying a sickle, then we'll know what's coming. And then in the future, you could change your colors. But yeah, it's very, very interesting. I really appreciate all the data, and it gives us something to think about and to integrate into our planning on the coast and working with the other communities. We've seen these things. These are not historic activities. These are activities that we are experiencing, the heat dome and things of that nature. And we know how they impact people, and we have to be prepared for them on an annual basis. So thank you for that. Councillor Kroll?
Mayor Beamish, and thank you, Rafe. And I guess I'm sort of going to somewhat echo Mayor Beamish's comments and Councillor D'Andrade's. Like, you know, for 50 years or better, people have been preaching that we're not good guardians of this planet. We're abusing it. We're treating it without any due respect, and it's payback time. And you know, I was at a conference 2 weeks ago on climate, and one of the significant things, and I'm very thankful that we have youth on our council. It was a delegation to the City of Vancouver council on a climate issue, and a young 16-year-old girl was saying, you know, am I ever going to live to be a grandmother? I might not even live to be a mother the way we're going right now. You know, there's some scientists who are predicting we're within 10 years of extinction as we know it. You know, the planet will survive, but we may. You know, I don't know how you educate people. I'm finding this really challenging. Like, you know, the information you've provided to us is gut-wrenching, it's sobering, but people still are rushing off to car dealerships and buying, you know, great big gas guzzling SUVs. And you know, and we're also in an awkward situation with tourism. You know, today I was watching two families staying at a local rental accommodation on the coast here, and they were both driving great big huge SUVs from California. So you think of driving those two vehicles from California to experience tourism on the Sunshine Coast, and you get into this imbalance of dynamics, like what we need financially to sustain businesses in the community and what it's doing, you know, to the environment. You know, and we try and do something, but it's instantly negated by someone else. So yeah, I would encourage people. There's an amazing series on Knowledge Network right now called Addy on the Climate Front. It's a British BBC documentary, but it's a 3-part series, and it's incredibly sobering. And the thing that we don't consider a lot of the times, and you referenced it with your reference to climate refugees. Like right now, 5 islands in the Solomon Group have been lost to sea level rise. And those people, you know, they have more islands that they're able to move on to, but these islands are already being challenged. And these aren't people who contributed to the climate crisis we're currently faced with, but they're suffering the effect. And we almost need to create a climate conscious of, you know, what I'm doing, but how's it affecting that person on that island who is now ankle deep in water, out of, you know, out of nothing that they've done. So I really appreciate what you've presented to us. It's a great report. You know, I just hope that more people embrace it very sincerely, because time is not our friend on this issue. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Great, thank you. And with that, we're going to say goodbye to you. We have another full agenda to carry on with, and several items, but I know that you're carrying on this work with the regional district, and our staff are involved in coordinating with you on that sort of thing, so, which is great. So I appreciate that. So thank you very much.
Grateful for your interest and your staff's collaboration. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, Council, our next report is going to be zoning amendment and form and character development permit application for a new 16-unit apartment building at 757 School Road. Now, could I have a motion from Council to receive all of the reports on the agenda today? Councillor Kroll, thank you. Councillor Ladwig, thank you. All in favor? Thank you very much. So we'll carry on, and Kirsten Defoe will make this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I will go ahead and share my screen. All right. So as was just mentioned, the applications to be discussed today are to allow an apartment building containing 16 residential units to be constructed at 757 School Road. While these are apartments as per the definition of the zoning bylaw, I want to avoid confusion by stating that the intention is for all proposed units to be stratified as individual condo ownership. The two approvals that are sought for this project are a zoning amendment from the existing R2 to a new to the RM3 zone or similar medium density residential zone, and for form and character development permit under DPA 4, which is multifamily land uses. The purpose of the report in this presentation is to obtain recommendations from committee to council and directions on the next steps for the requested zoning amendment and development permit. So the subject property, 757 School Road, is highlighted in here in blue. The site is currently developed with an aging single-family home. There's quite a varied number of surrounding uses, including single and multifamily residential uses, as well as various commercial and public uses like the school, the Legion site. The property's current zoning, as I mentioned, is single family residential 2 or R2. Based on this, the highest density that could be achieved on the site without rezoning is 1 principal dwelling and 1 attached secondary suite. And as with the uses, there's quite a range of different zones in the vicinity. I would note that the property immediately across O'Shea from the subject site is zoned the RM3 zone, which is the zone that's recommended by staff for this proposed rezoning. Under the official community plan, the subject site is designated with a medium density residential land use. Of course, any proposed rezoning is required to be to a zone which is in accordance with the OCP designation. And if the proposed rezoning is not in accordance with the OCP, an OCP amendment would be required in that case. And just to state the medium density residential designation, it does anticipate a density defined by an FSR of 0.7 to 1.2, or generally 40 to 75 units per hectare. A previous proposal for the zoning amendment was presented to the Planning and Development Committee and Council in 2020. A form and character review was not conducted at the time, but for context, this is one of the views of the project as viewed from the corner of a school in O'Shea Road. Following that, the appearance of that proposal to council, the resolution R 2020-93 was made, and that's shown here. To respond to some of the items that were included in that resolution, staff would identify that the RM3 zone would effectively address the provisions identified for a zoning amendment at the time. The development permit application presented in the staff report has been provided prior to first reading of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. And the applicant has provided additional information related to unit adaptability and accessibility, which was a letter attached as a letter that was an attachment to the staff report. Well, the form and character of the previous zoning amendment application was not assessed in accordance with the DPA 4 guidelines at the time. The current architect and applicant has provided 2 sets of drawings. So again, going from the original 2020 application with a different applicant to the current applicant and drawings that were presented to the advisory design panel in last December. And responding to suggestions from the advisory design panel, the current proposal, which is the focus of the staff report, which includes those revisions to address some of those items the panel had brought up. So the purpose of the report that I was included, that I've written and provided to the committee's consideration is for this rightmost proposal. So this site plan shows the layout of the proposal, including ground floor parking within the building footprint, as well as adjacent to O'Shea Road. The parking would be accessed essentially at grade or close to grade from O'Shea Road. It is noted that though the RM3 zone does allow for the smaller setbacks towards School and O'Shea Road as per the recommendations from Council's 2020 resolution, the proposed building remains essentially the same as the initial 2020 submission. So despite there being more, potentially being more allowances through rezoning, the building is still in the same location. The landscape plan presents a range of landscape elements and plantings, and will also seek to retain some of the existing trees, larger trees located at the back of the site. This includes various soft landscape components, hardscaping, a trail that is for common outdoor use, and landscaping and plantings throughout. We'll go quickly through these views. We can come back to them if you like later. So this is a view from the intersection of School and O'Shea Roads. This is a view from the southwest on O'Shea, wherein there's a single family dwelling on the property just off the left side here. This is a view from the north on School Road. And I note that this building, rendering actually shows the main entrance, which is well surrounded by landscaping. Moving forward from just a description of the proposal to the proposed zoning amendment. Staff's recommendation is to alter the zoning from R2 to RM3. This would both provide for the proposed development while also addressing Council's resolution R2020-93 as described earlier. The RM3 zone is shared only with the supportive housing development on the opposite side of O'Shea at 749 School Road. It does include permitted uses of supportive housing, which is what, of course, the 749 School Road used, as well as apartments and townhouses. So of the recommendations that were included with the staff report, staff have recommended that the rezoning be forwarded to council for first and second readings. However, committee may also not forward to the readings and identify requested changes, or on account of the density, which is within the FSR permitted, but beyond the units per hectare that's anticipated in the land use designation, so not the zoning, but the OCP. So there, if committee and council feel that this is representing a higher density than medium density, you can require an OCP amendment to the high density residential prior to readings. Included a table to show compliance with the requirements of the RM3 zone. We have included a clarification of the regulation related to maximum height. Currently, it states 11.5 meters or 3 stories, or sorry, 4 stories, whichever is less. We're not seeking to increase that. We're just seeking to only have one number, which is the 11.5, and it wouldn't be seen as appropriate to go beyond that in this location. The parking, as proposed, does not meet the zoning bylaw requirements in Part 6. We do have a professional parking study that supports the proposed parking provision of the design, and this was included as attachment E to the staff report. Staff would also note that there is insufficient temporary bike parking shown on plans, but we consider that this can easily be remedied by a condition to a development permit, so that basically one additional bike rack with 2 spots on it is provided with the building permit drawings. So the site is located within development permit area 4, which is multi-unit residential development. The guidelines are aimed at ensuring that new development is appropriate to its surroundings and compatible with surrounding uses or neighborhood character. The guidelines are also intended to ensure that multi-unit residential development is attractive for future residents. It was noted that the proposed design generally satisfied the form and character guidelines. However, there were a number of items that input from the advisory design panel was sought. And as I mentioned earlier, that had resulted in some of the changes. So the advisory design panel that met on December 1st, 2021, did recommend that the rezoning be supported. Also recommended that the zoning amendment be supported, subject to design changes to have use of a different material at the covered entry to enhance the primary entrance, to B, screen and soften the large parkade wall facing O'Shea, and C, consider changing the roof to a flat roof. So from my assessment of the revised drawings, I can see that attention was made to address all three of these design changes. The ADP, in addition, recommended some other items to be considered as part of the proposed development, not recommended changes per se, but things such as consider the use of car share, or consider integrating a stormwater storage system onto the site. So those have been recommended, although the only one that we've had action on is the investigation of with town infrastructure services and Canada Post on the possibilities of moving the mailboxes on O'Shea Road. Other referral comments were provided. I would bring to committee's attention two comments in particular. One is that the Squamish Nation has requested an archaeological assessment due to site similarities of a site with recent artifact find. And I have informed the applicant of this request. Additionally, Vancouver Coastal Health support was given in their response to the 2020 referral, in part due to the inclusion of the previously proposed playground. In the current proposal, the playground has been removed from the site design. So just wanted to be clear that that is no longer present. The letter of support from Vancouver Coastal Health was included as an attachment to the staff report for the committee's reference. So just getting into the final recommendations. So to reiterate the potential options for committee for the zoning amendment, you may forward to the council for first and second reading, not forward for readings and identify requested changes, or require consideration of an OCP amendment to high density residential prior to giving first and second readings. Related to this, as presented in the staff report, of course, is also that the CAC offer letter be accepted. And then on the development permit side, the two options presented are that committee may forward to council to authorize issuance of the development permit subject to adoption of the zoning bylaw amendment, or that it can be forwarded to council to authorize the issuance subject to both the adoption of that amendment as well as any recommended changes to reflect the ADP recommendations. So those are summarizing of the staff report recommendations. And I will turn it back over to the committee for consideration. I would also note first, though, that the applicant is in the audience if you have any questions to address to him, to Chris Sklar.
Kirsten, thank you very much for your presentation. And we may come back to it if council wants to see particular slides, but I'll open the conversation to council this time. Councilor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish, and thank you very much, Kristen. Really appreciate your report. The one thing I'd like to say, I'd really like to thank the proponent, from the, taking the comments that were made in committee and executing them, not only from the outside visual aspect, but I even noticed on the inside, some of the things with respect to the elevator were addressed and accessibility issues. So it's really nice to see when someone sort of works with the committee and sort of listens to the things, the comments that were made by the professionals who sit on that committee. So I think, I like the project. I mentioned earlier on our climate issue with respect to the parking issue. A couple of the communities that attended the parking thing, they have removed parking from their building requirements. Buildings can be built without any parking. So it's something interesting to consider when we're dealing with a climate crisis and we're encouraging people to have 1.5 vehicles. So I think it's an opportunity. You know, it's a nice project. It's close to the amenities. You've highlighted the aspects of car share and that. So yeah, I'd really like to thank you for listening to the committee.
Thank you, Councilor Kroll. Councilor DeAndrade?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I actually like the new design, even the flat. I don't have a problem for Upper Gibson. I have first a question regarding, is this still a modular building as it was proposed on the first draft?
I'm not sure. I haven't had conversations about that with the client. That was with the previous applicant.
Okay.
And I know that that's what they communicated to me. I have had some conversations with structural engineers, and I don't think that the current design lends itself to modularity. Okay. But it is still intended to be considered an affordable project. So I think we can explore that, but
I think that's my next question, because I think all the resolutions that were passed on the first, the ones that Kirsten read, the first after the first draft, it was because it was supposed to be entry-level market. So that was going to be my next question. Is it still, because I mean, it looks really pretty, is it still entry-level market?
That's the intent, and I think that's some of the big structural decisions that we made, such as having surface parking not going underground, which limited the amount of parking that we could have, and keeping everything on one sort of floor plate that just extrudes upwards, no big overhangs, and then keeping the units small as well. These are all the things that that we did to make sure that these could be as affordable as possible.
Okay, so I really appreciate you addressed accessibility. That was important to us, given the nature of the other project. But one thing I noticed, because you talk a lot about wheelchair access, which is great, everything, it's wide. It's also a beautiful design, things that are wide enough, but I don't see any parking designated for handicap parking, which should be at least 3.7. And actually the Center for Excellence of Universal Design, they designate for every 100 parking at least 4. So handicap. And so in this regard, you should have, if you are addressing, if accessibility, you are addressing in all the apartments, I think it makes sense to have one at least parking that a person in a wheelchair could access. So okay, Kirsten.
Go to Kirsten to respond.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the question, Councilor DeAndrade. So looking at the zoning bylaw requirements in section 6.10, which is parking spaces for physically disabled persons, where the required number of spaces is 0 to 19, there actually isn't a requirement that a space for disabled persons is provided. And because of the traffic or the parking study that was provided, essentially the required number of spaces for the use is 18, and therefore it's not within the space that requires those spaces. Whether committee and council want to suggest that is part of an updated change to the design, it is obviously in your purview. So, but yeah.
Mayor, can I?
No, I'd like to go to Councilor Ladwig next, please. No.
Okay.
Councilor Ladwig?
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. Yeah, thank you very much for your proposal. There's certain aspects of it that are very interesting to me. Definitely assuming you're trying to make it somewhat affordable, although I have no commitment of that, so I don't know. But I will say that from my perspective, I think the density is too high for that spot. I feel like there's already a lot of pressure in that little neighborhood. And we've already had complaints about lack of parking from folks in that neighborhood. And I'm struggling with us basically moving it up from a medium density residential to high density residential, which is essentially what this project is proposing. So yeah, so I'm struggling with the density. I'm struggling with the lack of parking, considering that's already been a pressure and issue that's been brought to us from people in that neighborhood. And from a personal perspective, I'm struggling a bit with the contemporary urban and lack of West Coast design. But if that's all it was, then maybe that's more of a personal preference. I'm not sure, but I struggle to see the West Coast design element in it myself, and that is a requirement for DPA 4. So here are my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Ledwig. Councillor Lumley?
Yeah, I like it, and the part of the with the I think it's the right area for that building. I mean, notwithstanding some of the zoning and we've been struggling with, obviously. I mean, you know, I don't think when they penned all this zoning, they knew what kind of a housing crisis we'd be in. I think it's much needed. I like the look of it. And you know what, I'm kind of with Councillor Kroll in the fact that the parking requirements are, we just sat through a climate change presentation, and maybe the parking limits are outdated, maybe. And on top of that, the town could do a better job outlining, and, you know, people can't always be complaining about parking all the time. Like, and I think the town can do a better job, even on that street, like where people can park and where people can't park, because we hear complaints about it all the time. And I get it. There's this like big shoulder on the road and there's the mailboxes there, but I mean, people are constantly complaining. I think maybe the town could make a kind of a comprehensive plan to where we're going to allow off-street parking and where we're not going to allow it. And then there won't be all these parking issues, I don't think. And people will know ahead of time. They go, hey, I want to head up there and see my buddy. Well, if there's no parking there, I'll you know, I'll have to park at Super Value and walk down. I don't know what the answers are, or maybe I'll just ride my bike. So maybe by decreasing the requirements a little bit, we could also be helping out with that presentation we heard earlier today.
Thank you, Councillor Lumley. I'd like to speak to the parking as well. And I think my concern is we've got three things. One is that we allow the supportive housing to go on site without parking. And they allow people to come in with vehicles, which we were told wouldn't happen. And that has caused a parking problem in that area. I know a lot of the times when I go by that facility, there are cars parked up and down the street and on the sidewalks. And that's a product of our own making. I don't know how by requiring 20 bicycle spaces, you're going to assure that everybody has a bicycle. Because it doesn't, I'd be interested to know just how many of the bicycle spaces in the supportive housing are actually used, because I think we required 40 bicycle spaces in there. That'd be interesting to kind of take a look and see. But what concerns me even further is I've got two documents in front of me here. One is the document for this project here with a traffic study, parking study, and the other one is a document for the Stonehurst with a parking study. Both coming to different conclusions. Both coming to different conclusions in terms of the amount of parking spaces that are required per unit. Stonehurst said 1.3. This one is to 1, and we are saying 1.5 in our bylaws. We need to come up with a new standard and justify that standard, whether it's 1 or 1.3 or whatever. But we can't contribute to a parking problem in the neighborhood, and that's a big problem that I have with the proposal. And I understand the Coast Car Co-op idea and things of that nature. I just wonder how much it will be used. We're unlike Vancouver, where they have all these car co-op opportunities. And people are much more used to them over there, and they have more choice, and they're just different animals over there. So I'm not sure that's going to solve the problem. My bigger question is, what standard are we as a town adopting on parking? Because that's where we need to go. So, Kirsten, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Mayor. I just did want to clarify that the Coast Car Co-op was a portion of the ADP's recommendation. And unless Chris can say otherwise, I don't believe that it's actually incorporated into a portion of this project at this time.
It is considered in the parking study.
As a possible option.
That's right.
Certainly.
Done for the project. So,
If I can
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so there were a couple of different recommendations with regards to the car co-op. One is providing memberships, de facto memberships for everybody that owns there, and then the other was providing a parking stall. But given the tightness of the parking the way it is, we didn't have the space to provide a parking spot for them without taking one away from a current unit.
Okay, I'm going to go back now to Councillor D'Andrade and then Councillor Kroll.
Thank you. Thanks, Carson, for your feedback. I understand that is not a requirement, but I think because the development is really selling accessibility as a point of interest, to me, it did not make sense. So I'm not going to make a big deal about that, but to me, it doesn't make sense that you don't offer one parking, accessible parking. So that's, and what I said, the recommendation is from the Center for Excellent Universal Design, which they are top leaders. And anyway, so it's at least 1 to 25. So that's I think if you're selling accessibility as a point of interest, you should have. That's what I think. Bicycle parking, I agree, 2 is not enough, and I support the recommendation that staff can work with the developer, at least 4. I think with people using more e-bike, which it is realistic, we have been seeing an increase in e-bikes, the more the better, because frankly, if you're gonna function during the day, I understand that people have storage, but to come with your e-bike and then put in the storage and then go out again, so that, and then people come in visiting, so you wanna support that. With regards to the parking, this is a challenge, because I understand if we look at the climate crisis, we should offer basically no parking, just public transportation. But the reality of the coast is we are longitudinal community, which we rely a lot in cars. So, but I think it's an area very close to public traffic, public transit. So I wouldn't make a big deal about the parking. No,
Councillor D'Andrade, I'm going to go to Councillor Kroll next, please.
Okay, I have one more question.
Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. With the parking issue with regard to the supportive housing, Silas and I have been trying to deal with BC Housing and Rain City on that issue. This proponent is not the parking problem in that area, it's Rain City. So I think it's not fair to suggest that this project, be penalized for the problem with the people across the street.
I don't suggest that, Councillor Kroll. What I say is we have a parking problem in the area.
I appreciate
and
that.
we're now we're compromising our bylaw in order to development to occur. Our bylaw says 1.5, and we're looking at compromising our bylaw.
And I think most people will agree that our bylaw is probably a little on the heavy side with respect to the requirements of parking. But, we've got 16 units, currently 18 parking spots being proposed. And at one point, I believe the developer was actually talking about marketing 2 units and saying that there was no parking available for those units. Now, I don't know if that's still in the mix, in which case there would only be 14 units requiring parking and 18 stalls. So there would be the opportunity even to create a handicapped parking spot by eliminating one of the 18. I think, we've got a climate crisis and we need to do things to discourage people getting into cars. And eliminating parking in residential. I lived in an apartment building in Vancouver. There were 40 units and there was no parking. It was not a problem. You found a place to park, whether you had to pay for it somewhere else or you didn't have a car. It was simple. And with the location of the building in the upper village, it is an opportunity for densification, which was a comment made at last week's council meeting about if we want to densify, let's go into the upper village. So, I stand at what I said in the beginning. I'm all in favor of this project.
Councilor Ludwig.
For me, it's simple. Like either we're going to stick to our OCP or we're not. And if you want to build high density, buy a high density lot and build it there. I'll support it. Like right now we're still negotiating with Stonehurst. That's a high density lot, and we're going to have to make a decision around that. But that's what that is. This is a medium density lot, and I just feel that if I, as a neighbor, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Kirsten's correcting me. But I just feel as a neighbor, when you buy a property, you should look at your OCP. You should know what's proposed around you. But I don't know.
Kirsten, your comment?
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks for the question. So the OCP that we have does define the density ranges for the residential designations by both the FSR ratio as well as the units per hectare. So with a units per hectare range for the medium density of 0.7 to 1.2, with the proposal being approximately 1.02 based on the OCP. It actually fits right within the OCP's medium density designation. There is in the staff report a comment where I clarify that staff note that there's a bit of a discrepancy between the FSR and the units per hectare, wherein larger residential units are sort of assumed to be the norm, which doesn't really help affordability. So really, though, we have our units per hectare being higher than the 75% general range identified in the OCP, the FSR is actually right smack in the middle of sort of what's anticipated.
Yeah. Councilor Ludwig.
Okay, thank you for that. But again, it's like, I just feel like we're squeezing a lot onto a very small lot. Like if they can't get enough, even if they can't get enough parking stalls, and I agree that we need to, I totally agree with Mayor Beamish that we need to have a conversation about parking. And then I think 1.5 is too high. I think 1 is too low. I think it's somewhere in the middle there. And I think that considering that there is pressure in that neighborhood, I feel that we can push back a little bit here. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. Chris, I'll let you respond there.
I just wanted to swing back to the parking report. I mean, I don't know what the Stonehurst parking report, how they put their numbers together. The parking report we have basically looked at a number of, had made a number of observations of buildings in Gibsons, and they basically tracked observed parking demand. So they actually went out there and looked at how many units were in the parking stalls. And they also looked at vehicle ownership from ICBC registration information. And in both those cases, the observed parking demand was at the most 0.6, and the actual vehicle ownership was at most 0.9. And so that's where they felt that our numbers were fine, because at 1, we are over what is generally observed in the buildings around. So I just wanted to clarify that, and that I don't think that they're necessarily recommending that 1 is the right number. They're saying that 1 is okay. So that's where they get their information from. And a couple of comments were made that these are old numbers, but I would say that, parking ownership is actually going down as time goes on. People are starting to find alternative ways. I had a conversation with the owner of the Coast Car Co-op, and they said that, their co-op car use in Gibsons is booming because people are not getting that second car, and they're just counting on these other modes of transportation.
Councilor D'Andrade, then Councilor Lumley.
Thank you. I just want to before we figure out the parking, whether 1.5 is the right number, I'm gonna differentiate Upper Gibsons and Lower Gibsons, because Lower Gibsons is touristic. We need parking for the street parking for the stores, for tourists, and while in Upper Gibsons we don't have this issue. one thing with urban forests, one of the recommendations, we haven't gone through the planning, but one of recommendations, it's really shrink the size of streets, right? So we can offer in certain streets, we can offer a lot of parking. I mean, my street, for example, yeah, it's a pain in the neck when you see a car in front of your house, but at the same time, you know, it's function. And the beauty is cars slow down. Cars slow down. So it's not, as long as this is not a major road or something, it's going to impact traffic. So in this regard, I'm going to be flexible, and I don't want to make comparison with Stonehurst, which is in the heart of the tourist, area. If I can ask, you mentioned about, actually, we are in a climate crisis, so I'm going to push for climate solutions. Green roof, it might not be huge, but why you're not considering, since you went flat, why you don't consider a green roof?
I think that potentially adds a lot of cost. Green roofs can be heavy, the structure, all that sort of thing. I mean, it's not something that came up, so I haven't discussed it with the client. It's something I could bring up with them, but my sense is that they would probably not want to have to do it if they weren't asked to. Just out of the, the idea that this is meant to be an affordable project, wood frame, everything like that.
Thank you, Chris. Councilor, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, just also wanted to mention that I just had a quick look at the plans, and I think there is room in there to fit one accessible stall in there. I could have a look at that. It does narrow the access beside the loading bay, but there is a spot in there that we could take away that a bit from that access and turn it into an accessible stall.
Thank you. Councilor Lumley.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess maybe again echo the parking. I think David was right, even in an earlier meeting with Stonehurst, the fact that lower Gibsons, there's going to be a higher propensity to have more parking stalls, because even if those are residences, there's no bank down there. There's the market, but there's no major shopping, liquor store, so on and so forth. All that stuff's walkable distance from this development. I would even anticipate, if somebody actually found a rental in there that was more affordable than what they might be paying currently, it gives them an opportunity to release themselves of a car if they did have two cars, so it could be beneficial in the long run in that respect too. The school's there, like everything's just walking distance from there. So anyway, just pointed that out.
I think one of the limiting factors of the location, though, is that it fronts on the school road, and there's no parking on school road. So all of your parking, excess parking, goes onto O'Shea. And if you drive by that location at any given time now, there is no excess parking. And then when school is in and out,
control that by just putting up no parking signs. Like if the neighborhood's flabbergasted with this, I mean,
yeah,
and you're correct with the Rain City project. Those people aren't supposed to be having cars,
and that's the problem. And that's I say we allowed a variance on parking, and we're paying for it, and that's difficult. So, Councilor Kroll.
And this is no reflection on staff, because we're in an awkward position right now, but it's, the Rain City folks are the ones that are breaking the rules. They're violating the agreement that they entered. And now we're saying we've got a problem. So we're potentially jeopardizing a viable project because of, the bad behavior of the neighbor. I think, with enforcement of the parking, we've reapproached the Legion to see if they might consider, renting parking to Rain City. The church has been allowing a certain amount of parking on their property, as long as it's insured and not abandoned vehicles. So I think there's compromise in the neighborhood.
I think anytime you look at off-site parking arrangements, they are always subject to change at a moment's notice, so that you might go into a project with the idea that, oh, we arrange park at the Legion, and then they decide to sell the lot or build, and then you have another problem. So Councilor Ladwig, and then Councilor D, and then we've got to move on. So,
a question from staff. I thought I read somewhere in here that staff recommended 3 stories. Did I imagine that, or I'm trying to find it, but I can't. That was in my imagination. Was it? No. Okay. Sorry.
thank you. Okay, Dean Drad, your hand is still up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think obviously I feel compelled to support this project because of the market entry level, and we need housing. But how council can have the guarantee that this is going to happen? That's my concern, right? I mean, that we provide the support, but then suddenly these apartments will be, just because they have a nice view or whatever is the reason, and then it won't facilitate too much the goal of the densification goal, or whatever this was supposed to be. So
I don't think it's fair to ask the architect to commit to market entry level housing. I think we have to ask the owner that.
That's okay, Mayor. I'm just putting the question because
exactly,
the report, that's what the report says, that the density, so I don't expect that but I think we would like to have some sort of
and I like
regard.
Yeah. Councilor Crowell.
I would like to move the staff recommendations for 4.1. And I was just looking for the page that they're on, but they're also captured on the cover sheet of the agenda. So I would like to move the recommendations.
Seconded by Councilor Lumley. Any further discussion? Okay, I'm going to call it Councilor Dindrad.
Yes, I think, because obviously I have concerns with parking too, but don't you think that we can start regulating parking certain streets, and if people need to park, and they have to walk to avoid the case, because it seems viable. I mean, that's what big cities, we are comparing ourselves at one point with Vancouver or whatever major city, that's what they do.
We can do lots of things, but we haven't done them. And that's the key. We're approving projects that are going to be a problem. And we don't have that solution put in place. So we know that. So okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Okay, opposed? Okay, so that passes and moves on to the public hearing, which is scheduled in the, well, it has to go first of all to council for first, second reading, and I'm anticipating that will happen early July. And then we'll have the public hearing is scheduled for 5:30 p.m. on July 26, 2022. Okay. Chris, there's more work to be done. Still got to go by. This resolution has to be adopted by council yet, so that there'll be discussion, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I encourage you to get together with our planner to look at that aspect of things. Okay, thank you. And we'll move on to our next items on the agenda. And I do not intend to defer these items again. So council, these are the staff reports that were deferred from the last agenda. And we have staff with us in the room. And so we're going to move forward with them. And the first one being the administration quarterly report. I think it's the first one on my list. Let's see if it's on the agenda list. Right, I've got infrastructure service department, parks, public works, water and wastewater operations, and then administrative and corporate and legislative services. So that's the first one, and I have that. Everybody still got their copies from last time. Good. Okay. So I'll go to Rebecca for the report. They have been received, Rebecca. So.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. I won't dwell a lot on the content. I will know that you've had some time to give it a read. There's some brief recap of the return of Manny, who returned to us after a leave of absence in February and who was intended to gradually return, though I think it wasn't very gradual. I think he returned to work fairly quickly. And Mark provided a recap for particular areas during the time that he was acting corporate officer regarding the Holland Lands Cultural Corner Revitalization Committee, the Police Transition Select Committee, and the collective bargaining process. And he says there was more, but those were just some key points that he wished to highlight. And now, of course, Mark is staying on as our special projects manager, and we want to welcome Manny back and thank Mark for helping us out during that time. It was really great to have both of them, and to continue to get to have the ability to access both of them has been a really nice thing for staff to have. There's a list there of our meetings. There's a quick note that we did have 9 more meetings than we had in the first quarter of last year, and this is largely due to the committees that were active during the past year, which are listed there: the Tree Bylaw Select Committee, the Holland Lands and Cultural Corner Revitalization Select Committee, the Police Transition Select Committee, and the Public Arts Advisory Committee. We had some HR changes beyond just what was happening with our CAO. We welcomed Amanda Short as our new executive assistant. And we've had a bit of restructuring as well in the ICBC department with welcoming back the graduate return to work from someone who'd been on leave there, and moving people around as that required us to do. And we continue to provide our usual services of commissioner for taking affidavits. This is usually for foreign pensions. And we work on contracts. Did somebody wish to say something? Sorry, I thought I heard a question. We continue to deal with correspondence, inquiries, and complaints, which cover a really broad range of issues. Tracy is here, and if you have questions regarding the Records and Information Management System, she's been the lead on that, and she's provided a really nice update on where that's at right now. We've made some progress with regard to the project charter, conducting of interviews, and the drafting of the situation assessment report is underway. The Voice over Internet Protocol telephone project was completed in Q1, and that was a really huge project. It took more than a year to finish, and it had several complicated parts to it, but we got through it, and everyone has their new phones now, and we're adjusting to the new system. We continue to work on the Council Chambers Audiovisual Upgrade Project. As you are aware, there's a delay in obtaining some of the equipment, but we'll continue moving forward as we're able. We drafted an AVICC resolution that was submitted for the AGM that was held in February, and that will be moving forward to UBCM. And the Council Code of Conduct was finalized and adopted, and the new elections work was done on the new elections bylaw. Professional development was done by both myself and Tracy, and you can see the broad range of topics that were covered by both herself and myself for our team. Filming permits included the still standing and the which didn't actually happen until Q2, but much of the work was done in Q1, and we really enjoyed working with that team. They were one of our more professional teams to work with that have come through the town. The freedom of information and protection of privacy issues continue. There's a list of a number of them that were finished in Q1. And of course, work towards the 2022 budget, which involves all of our teams to some degree. And then Lorraine carrying us through and hitting a home run for us in the end. She's just really great, and don't know what we'd do without her. If you have questions regarding Tracy's work on the records management, and Tracy as Deputy Chief Election Officer has done a lot of the groundwork on the preparations for the elections, and she's reported to you there, and she's available for questions on that as well. And she is now handling the public use permits as well. And she welcomed a new staff member, Glenda Seward, who you may see out at the front reception, who has joined our team. And we've been really pleased to welcome her on board. And Elizabeth is, I believe, over in the attendees section, but she probably would move over and join us. If you have any questions for her, you'll see her report there and the work that she has done. As usual, she does a stellar job. And then it finishes off with your finance department report on council expenses for 2021. And of course, Q1 of 2022 is captured there as well, most of which show expenses paid upfront in advance for AVICC and for the UBCM for accommodations to attend UBCM in this coming September. So I'll open it up to questions, and Tracy and Elizabeth, if are available, if you wish to direct a question to them there also.
Rebecca, thank you very much, and thank you for your report and presentation. I'm, impressed with the amount of work that's going on. 43 meetings is intense. I talked to people who asked me about being the mayor. I said 600 meetings over 3 years, 4 years for the mayor, and that's taken the regional district role. But that's a conservative estimate. That doesn't include many of the other things that we do. So that there's a lot of meetings that go on. Greatly appreciate the updates of the training that's going on and the opportunities that staff are getting to upgrade professional development. Good to see that's happening. I really strongly encourage that throughout the organization. I think COVID was kind of held people back from attending conferences and attending some of the training that was no longer offered, and now it's a chance to get out and do that. And I appreciate the reminder on the election process and the deadlines, because there's could be a very active time, and I know that council did receive some cautionary note about what we should and should not do during an election period, so that we can pay attention to that as well. So I'll turn it over to staff. Councilors, any questions from council? Comments? You've had a chance to read it, so Becca, the fact there's no questions means that you've answered them all in the presentation. I really appreciate that, and welcome back, by the way. It's good to see you back. Yeah. So, and Tracy and Amanda and Elizabeth, thank you also for your work. Thank you. Councillor Dindrad.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. I think this well-written report makes everybody's life easier in a way, and I think for the public too, because and then we have a sense of how much work is done. So I appreciate the reports, and that's why I don't have questions, because it's all answered.
Thank you. Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish, and thank you, Rebecca, for the report. And, as Mayor Beamish said, you really, captured everything. And I'd also just like to remind people, the draft of the annual report is out, and once again, Elizabeth's knocked it out of the park, and there's an opportunity for people to have a look at it. It's available at the front desk, but it's a great report, and I can't thank our staff enough. It's an amazing team, and we're very fortunate to have them.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Councillor Kroll. Yeah. Okay, and I see that Graceland is up next, and welcome, Graceland.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got 4 reports here.
You do, yeah.
We're hoping in the future that this allows us to kind of space it out, and the infrastructure services one is going to be the more general one. So that'll include an administrative update from Marcy, an update from Michelle, and then other general development or infrastructure services or capital projects updates. From an operations and maintenance point of view, overall, there's been a focus on, in the first quarter, on planning coordinating, changing some of our processes, dealing with, a new manager training me. Public Works in the first quarter, big focuses for them was the snow and ice response in the winter, which we had talked about at the time, but some lessons learned and the overview of the costs are there, but that doesn't include the cost of parks. Inflow and infiltration as well. So there's been they've been going through a list of areas for us to patch up and reduce the amount of flow from storms that are going into the wastewater treatment plant. For parks, the main thing to highlight there and perhaps worth a conversation is challenges with the homelessness camps. Staff have been doing a lot of cleanup and have been working with Silas on response and support. And for the wastewater treatment plant, and I call them operations now because they keep reminding me that they're not just doing wastewater, they're wastewater and water operations. There was no effluent quality concerns, but we have been focusing on reviewing regulation. There's a big budget this year, so a lot of it was planning the work. And SCADA, we welcomed Rob Knowles to the team. And he was previously our contractor for SCADA, and we're very lucky to have him on board. So he's been doing a lot of data and instrumentation response and managing that capital project as well. I forget what else I was going to highlight.
Oh.
But I also just want to acknowledge that this is a change for the quarterly report. So if you do have any feedback of the kinds of information that you're looking for, if it's too much, too little, or if us formatting it in this way, if you'd find that helpful, or if we would like to go back to the previous version, that's okay too. Normally, the foreman will be presenting these with my support, obviously, but really encouraging them to be present for those questions and more of the operational feedback, and also just to hear from you guys and hear what kind of feedback we have for operations and maintenance for each of the departments. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I'll just note for anybody who has joined us or watching the meeting today, Councillor Lumley had to leave early. So that's why he's no longer with us. I should have said that when I noted that he was gone. Before I go to councillors, there's one report in here I'd like to highlight, and that is the Sharman Creek assessment. Very interesting report. If you've had a chance to read it in detail, good to know that it still supports fish. Challenging to know that it doesn't support them in the upper reaches where it could, and I think there's lots of work to be done. I will be introducing a resolution on this notice of motion to the meeting tonight, asking that staff be directed to look at in the long term the opportunity to designate Sharman Creek as a protected conservation area within the town. It is our watershed. It is a watershed within the town of Gibsons, and it's a watershed that's almost completely within the town of Gibsons. We have a watershed above us, so we have little influence over. But Sharman Creek is one that we do have influence over, and I think that's one that we should be taking special care of. And one way to do that is by designating a special area, and then that also impacts in terms of education and maybe in terms of bylaws as to how people, property who are adjacent to or include the watershed need to act in terms of protecting the watershed and these nature. So, but it's not kind of Grayson is not going to ask you to have a report by next month. And it's going to ask you to have something in place that we can look at to the 2023 budget process as to how we go about doing that. But it's a very interesting report, one that I've been anxious to see. I would like to ask that it be referred to the Sunshine Coast Conservation Association, as well as to the stream keepers, Shirley Samples, who's in charge of stream keepers, because it's the type of thing that we need to do and need to do more of in terms of assessments. And this is an excellent example of having somebody come in, do an independent report, and over time, and it's going to take many years to get the concrete structures out of there and repair the habitat. But you know, as you know, I'm going up to Haida Gwaii, and there are rivulets that come down onto the beach that in the salmon runs that have salmon going up those. And they go up to spawn, and they spawn at a higher elevation. And but they are, you can walk down the beach and pick them up. And but they're fighting their way up these little creeks, and we need to restore this habitat here and protect it. So I have other comments to make, but that's one I wanted to highlight to council, that I think it's a great. It was great to see that report and read that report. So but I'll go to council because there are questions. Councilor Cole. Yeah, go ahead.
Mayor Beamish, I just wanted to note that Michelle Lewis is attending.
Yeah.
So if we do have any questions related to the natural asset or specifically that report, then she would be very happy to speak to that as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, come on board, Michelle, because there may be questions. And Paul, I see you're there as well. So you can join us, and that way we can see the team. You're there. Thank you. Councilor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish, and thank you, Graceland and the team. I really like the idea of the directors addressing their areas of expertise that sort of, you know, get it directly rather than it going through, you know, any filters. I just wondered, is there any further information with respect to White Tower Park, where we are? I know that it's, you know, there's the archaeological issues, but I'm just wondering if there's any updates there, and you know, because it directly sort of reflects on Mayor Beamish's initiative with the Charmin Creek ravine. So any information you're able to provide at this time there, and I realize that it is a work in progress. So.
Michelle, can I refer to you?
Thanks, Graceland. So the update that I provided in this report was obviously just from the first quarter. So there has been a bit of movement since then, but that would be reflected in the Q2 report as far as White Tower Park for the permitting process. I can provide an update if you're interested at this time.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Let's not wait till the report comes out.
Sure, sure. So it's in the permit process with the Squamish Nation and the province. And I just received word today that the nation, they are going to be issuing the permit for the archaeological investigation, which would mean that they would do non-mechanical hand digging of the area. And they just outlined any amendments to the methodology that the archaeologist, the consultant, had outlined. And so as soon as that happens, it will go back to the province, and the province will then issue the archaeological investigation permit. And that at that point, the Squamish Nation member, as well as in situ consulting, would be doing that field work.
Thank you.
And if I may just give you an update, Mayor Beamish, on that Charmin Creek report.
Yes.
I'm happy to finally have been able to share it with you. It was a long time in the making, and the final draft took quite a while just due to COVID and other issues. So I wanted to highlight too that tonight at council, I'm going to be bringing forward a grant application, and that will include the proposed works to Charmin Creek.
Good. Thank you. Councillor Ludwig.
Councillor Kroll basically stole my thunder, but I just wanted to say to all of you how much I really appreciated these reports. The fact that they came from all of you individually. I know they're a lot of work, and I'm sure it's a total drag because this probably isn't what everybody. It's not really what you're paid to do. You're paid to actually go out and do your job, not report on it. But it really is great. And the photos are worth really helpful. So thank you. I love this new format. I think this is great. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Yeah. Councillor D'Andrade.
Thank you. Likewise, I really appreciate not only for myself, because you understand better things, right? Instead of just looking, oh, this project is on the making for 2 years, what's going on? So here is a more, a feedback and a more, I don't know, it brings also the value of the employee in this regard, right? Because things are happening and it's not an easy road necessarily. But another thing that I also appreciate is the communication with the public, right? We have this in our mandate, more and more, people want to be involved. And this, to me, it's so easy to get involved because from the onset what's going on. Plus, I think reporting at the end also help a good reporting because you can always go back and will help staff or in any analysis. So to me, it's very positive. I have one question regarding the Source to See project. I understand we are on the second phase, but do we have any reporting for the phase 1?
Sorry, through you, Mayor, we're about to begin phase 3, and there isn't at this point. We were looking at condition assessments, and now we're looking at risk analysis. But the technical reports, the final reports, have not been drafted. They've been, they have been drafted, but they haven't been completed. So this next phase will show, those drafts will come to staff and we will edit and then go back and forth. And so there are, I believe, 3 technical reports that will be coming, 3 or 4 technical reports that will be coming, but there's nothing to report out at this point beyond what I mentioned in the quarterly report.
Okay. And Mayor, if I just want to say something regarding the technical reports, because I myself also, I really appreciate the Charman Creek report, so we can understand. And I think our community has a stake in our environment. So I know sometimes we could perceive that, well, this is too technical for the people, but I think people appreciate. I did. And with the pictures, I think was a great opportunity for education as well. And now here comes the grant. You understand why, right? So I think it's increased support as well. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, just to that comment about technical reports, and that feedback has been received from council in the past about how, just to make it digestible by the public. And so the communications and education piece to the Source to See project is being considered as well.
Do we know, is the Charman Creek assessment on our website for people to look at?
I don't think it is yet because we were waiting to present it.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'd like to see it up there. Paul, if I may, I don't want to leave you out of this conversation. Couple questions I have. One is, and it's not in the report, but because it's coming up, but that would be preparation for this year, tending to the odors from the sewer treatment plant. What is happening in that area? I think you muted, Paul. Yeah. But it was a good answer. Still muted. Yeah. 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 It's still muted. The bottom left-hand corner has got the little there. Should work.
How's that?
That's good.
Yeah,
okay.
I have 3 monitors here. Sorry. So I felt like we needed a chance operationally to see what we could do here, and I talked to Graceland and Urban about that, about just doing the best to optimize our process, and from there doing further testing when it's warm, because it's really hard to get good data during the winter, spring, and fall, just because of the way the air patterns work. So where we tend to get the odor accumulation is in the summertime, and just with the nature of the wind, how it works, and it kind of concentrates. And so I think that's when we need to do some testing. And because it could likely be a very, very expensive project, I think we need to be mindful of that, it would be a project for odor, but not necessarily to make us in compliance with anything or to improve our effluent quality. It would be 100% from an annoyance or perceived community viewpoint.
Yeah.
I think that we want to be mindful of that before we invest in a huge process to take care of it.
Somebody mentioned to me that it's possible that somebody who was involved in the original construction of that site at the time, the new treatment plant, might be moving back to the coast, and maybe we can get him involved in trying to find a solution to the problem. He has experience. The other question I have is on well 6. How is that coming?
As far as I know, I've been out of the loop ever since the decisions were made to for breaking ground. So I don't really have an update. That's actually more Jackson is the water, but as far as I know, it's will be going ahead. I know I don't have confirmed information, but of course, getting materials is going to be a challenge for everybody for any project. So I'm not sure how that will do for them. Just getting some of the programming and computer side of the project. I know that's the supply chain is tough right now.
Grace, any comment on that from you?
No, unfortunately, I don't have much to add.
Okay.
Kendrick has been an excellent support on that, and Manny's also been project managing.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. Okay, and before I let you go, we did receive a letter from the public there recently, and I don't know if council received a copy of it to read. So this says, June 17th, thank you for your dedication to keeping our spectacular coastal community beautiful and vibrant. Magical festival of lights along the Marine Drive brightens up the dark winter and brightening our spirits. A glorious splash of colors in the spring and summer, stunning hanging baskets and petunias at Wine Garden Park, the handmade banners, the charming birdhouse and baskets lining the main road along the road, provide and maintained by council and gardeners, make this beautiful and essentially gift to the residents, to visit and visitors alike. A special thanks to Zaglaco for their spectacular sea garden and created in the spirit of love and community and beauty. We all need this with praise and gratitude. So thank you all very much to you and your staff. And I know, Grace, you've shared this with your staff. I just hadn't shared it with council yet. So thank you all very much. And I know we all appreciate it's a lot of work, and we try not to put that pressure on you. We want to give you time to do the work so that you can do your best. And that's really what is needed. It's often just time and opportunity. So thank you very much for that. We'll try not to pressure you. Okay. But occasionally it happens. Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. And this morning I was going to a meeting at the market and I ran into one of our staff taking water samples. And we had an interesting conversation because I think it is on the town website that our water is currently being chlorinated because you're flushing the system, and just to ensure in the flushing process that anything that's stirred up is dealt with appropriately. But I was really impressed. He was out there. Additional samples are being taken from various sources around town, the wells. And it's just nice to know that, you know, a lot of that stuff you don't even think about. You turn on your tap, you get potable water, and you don't think about it. But there's so much that goes into it behind the scenes. You know, he had one of our town vehicles just loaded with various samples and stuff. So it's, you know, we're being well looked after, and I thank you for that.
Well, thank you all very much. And thank you for taking your time with us today. That ends the business part of our meeting. We'll now go to inquiries and invite anybody who has an inquiry in the audience to make themselves known to our corporate officer.
If you have a question for council, please raise your hand. There are no hands raised, Mayor Beamish.
Okay, that means we've answered all the questions that we went along. That's excellent. So our next meeting is scheduled for the next regular committee of the whole, is scheduled to be held on Tuesday, July 12th at 3 p.m. And we are going to, now I want to go to the corporate officer or to the director of operations on this, corporate operations. Why are our next meeting July the 12th and not the first Tuesday in July?
When council set the schedule at the beginning of the year, a change was made for the month of July as a result, I believe, of the long weekend.
Good. Okay.
And the
the
tax
fact- and the tax activity, yeah. So just so council knows, the first Tuesday in July is not a meeting day as it usually is. It will be going to the second Tuesday in July on that. So good. Thank you. Okay, I'll ask for an adjournment. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Kroll, thank you. Councillor Ladwick, thank you. All in favor? Thank you very much. And council will see you at 7 o'clock. And if you have provided the little note that you had the opportunity to provide, it will be in a wrapped package at 7 o'clock. Okay. So if you need to put something into it, you can contact Amanda in advance.
Mayor, just to confirm, it's going to be at the council chambers, right?
It's at council chambers, yes.